Welcome to 20th Century Adventures. I'm Nathanael Logsdon, and I'm going to show you the old way to make maple syrup. So we're out here in the woods. We're at the Fairhaven Farm Sugar Bush right now. I have previously gone through in the summertime when it's easier to see the leaves on the trees. If you're not good at identifying trees in the winter, you need to do them when the leaves are on. And I've marked all of the maple trees out here. That way I know in the dead of winter which ones to tap and which ones to not tap. So we're going to start. This is actually a lengthy process from start to finish. There's a lot of time involved, so we'll be coming back and filming a little bit here and there over the next several weeks. But this is how it starts, and that's what I'm going to show you right now. It's a little nasty out here, but it's actually ideal conditions. What you're looking for is you want the temperatures to be in the 40s, maybe low 50s in the daytime, and below 32 at night. Not real deep cold. You don't want teens. You're looking for that 20s to 32 range at night as a low, and looking for the warmer, just above freezing sort of days to get the ideal sap flow. So that creates a capillary action in the maple trees, and that's what we want to be able to tap. So it's mid-January right now. When I come back to you, over the next couple of weeks, we'll keep doing this for about 4 to 6 weeks. That's kind of the ideal section of time that we have to work, and we'll get hopefully a whole lot of sap that we can turn into syrup. It takes about 40 gallons at prime sugar content of tree sap to make 1 gallon of maple syrup after it's all cooked down. So we got to collect a lot of sap. That's why we'll go through and we'll tap as many trees as we can in order to get all that sap. And I'll use more modern equipment on some of my other trees farther out, but for the purposes of historical recreation, we're going to show you the way it would have been done in, say, the period from 1930 on back. And so that's what I'm going to start with today, and I'm going to show you how it's done. Alright, so we're going to tap this tree. What we are looking for is a tree that is at least 12 inches in diameter. Those are going to be big enough to tap. You don't want to take more of the tree's life resource than it can stand. And so trees that are under that size, we generally don't tap until they get to at least 12 inches diameter. That way, we're letting those trees get all the nutrients they need to grow to a good size. Another thing we want to be careful of is when we drill our tap holes, we don't want to go past the sapwood. So you only want to go about 1 inch deep, maybe 1.25 inches, to get through that sapwood, through the bark and into the sapwood without getting into the heartwood. If you get in the heartwood, that opens up the tree to potential damage from disease and things like that. So we want to take good care of our trees. So I'm going to tap this tree, and what we're wanting to do here is we want to make sure that first off we're not tapping a hole where there's already been a hole. Just like when you cut your finger, it'll leave a scar, and that scar tissue is a little different than the original tissue. Same way with trees. When you tap a tree, that hole will heal over, and it creates a scar tissue in the tree that won't flow as well if you try to tap that same spot again or close to it. I usually use the hand rule. If you've got an old scar here, you put your palm over the scar and don't tap anywhere that is within the range of that hand. So you always want to go a little further around. Usually 6 inches away is a good rule of thumb. And you can go up and down. If you live in an area that has a lot of snow, you don't want to tap too low, because up in New England and upstate New York, places like that, they get a lot of snow. And if you tap low, your buckets will be covered in snow. You won't even find them out there. Likewise, I've heard stories of old-timers going out after a deep, heavy snow, some of the ones like we've had this year up in New England, and the snow's up here. They go out on snowshoes and tap the trees, and then it warms up and the snow melts and they can't reach the buckets. So you want to try to, as best as possible, reach a range that's going to be fairly close to you. And the ideal situation, you can't always do this, especially with a tree that's been tapped for many, many years. But the ideal situation that you want is you're looking for the south-facing side of the tree. The tree is going to get more sunlight on that south-facing side, so it's going to be more of a dramatic jump. You'll get a longer period of warmth, and the sun will go, over to the west. If you're tapping, morning to noon on the south side of that tree, you're going to hit kind of the ideal location. And you can't always do that, like I said, with a tree that's got a lot of scar tissue in it. You can't do that, so you have to find a different way to do it. And you can tap on any side of the tree and still get sap, but you get more flow if you can tap on that south side. The other thing we want to look for is, just like in your arm you have veins that run through that are your main capillaries, trees have that too. Maple trees, they're not perfectly round and smooth. They've got kind of bulbous veins that run through them. And you don't have to hit one of those, but if you do, you'll get a little more flow out of the tree. So I try to look for a spot. We've got one right here that runs down, and it's kind of raised all the way down into the root, and you can see the root coming down into it there. So this just takes practice, paying attention. You got to look at a lot of trees to be able to see it right off. But this one's pretty obvious here, and this is on the south side of the tree. So we can take a compass, and you figure out where north is, and then you tap the opposite side of the tree. Basically, if you're facing the tree and you're facing north on your compass, you're looking at the south side of the tree. So that's where we want to tap. And so what we're going to do here, and some of my equipment here is antique, and some of it's stuff that I've put together. I don't have any of the antique sap buckets that were used in this period, so I've kind of made do with my own system. Maybe someday I'll find a good deal on some of those and be able to have the original ones, but for now we're doing a close approximation. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to try and hit the spot we want. And I know we don't get a lot of snow here. This is unusual to have even as much as we've got right now. So I'm not going to worry about going too high. I'm going to go, or too low. I'm going to go at a spot that's pretty comfortable for me. And I'm going to try and hit in that vein, and I'm on the south side. And I'm watching to make sure my auger is straight. And then we're just going to bore a little section. A lot of times I'll put a mark on my bit so I know for sure how deep I'm going. I didn't do that with this one because I know this one pretty well. This thing works great. This is a nice sharp bit. It's actually an antique one that I restored and sharpened. And so you just want to clean out the bits of junk in there, little bits of sawdust and mashed up tree particles. You can see this is already running like crazy, just with that little bit. This is prime sapping season right now. Alright, so we got a nice little hole there. Some of the modern stuff uses a smaller hole, which is a lot better for the tree. They'll use real tiny bits and plugs, plastic plugs that go in there. I like to use those on my trees just because it's less damage long run. But I always like to try to do one or two with the period stuff, just because I think it's neat. That's what we're here for. So I'm going to lay that down and get my hammer out here. And what we're using are these little taps. These are a little bit more modern probably because they're aluminum. These are probably more like 1940s, 50s. In the teens and 20s, they would have used more of a cast iron looking one that I don't happen to have. But we're going to run this tap in here. And you'll hear the sound change. You start tapping in and it's kind of a tink, 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 and it goes thok, thok, thok. And that's when you know you've got it well seated. You want to get that in there all the way. Otherwise, it will leak around the outside of the tap. And now I've already got sap coming out. It's going to drip here in just a second. That's a good sap flow. Look at that. Right there, there it is. That's maple sap coming out, with the sugar content and the flavor of that maple syrup. And it's actually, it's kind of sweet. It tastes like water with just a hint of sugar in it. And we'll boil all that down, gallons and gallons of it, and we'll end up with a nice thick brown maple syrup that's just unbelievable, perfect on pancakes. So now we've got to collect this. So the next step is we'll put a tin bucket on here. These are a little small. I'd rather have a bigger bucket because then I don't have to dump it as often. And we don't want the snow and the rain and stuff like that to get in, so I've fashioned little hoods. There were commercial, some people made these. They made them themselves just like this. And then there were also commercial versions that you could buy that was a longer bucket and a hood that snapped on that the spigot went inside of, so it was all protected. We're going to do this. So this is just a little bit of sheet metal that I cut, and I'm going to tie it on. And there we go. Now we'll let that fill and we'll go tap some more. We need about 50 to 80 taps for a decent run. That'll give me a couple gallons of syrup by the time all is said and done. So, off to tap some more. Been a couple of days now. We've got a whole bunch of sap. I've got most of it in the evaporator already. So we're ready to start a fire. We're going to make some maple syrup. Now we're going to need to get this fire really good and hot so that we can boil this off as fast as possible. Unfortunately, the weather here in southern Indiana is really fickle, so you never know what you're going to get. Currently, it's about 65 degrees outside. It's really warm. Maple sap is about as fragile as milk, so you've got to deal with it right away. You can't let it get too warm. If it's cold outside, refrigerator temps, it'll last a week easy. With this kind of heat, it's going to go bad real fast. So normally I would want to start a boil at the beginning of the day and do it through daylight. Unfortunately, we got to do what we got to do. So here we are starting a batch already 5 o'clock in the evening. So it's going to get dark. I'm going to be doing this late, but we got to do what we got to do. We got fire started. So I'm going to explain for a minute how this evaporator works. So I built this. It's made out of solid copper. It's all soldered with lead-free solder on all the edges and corners where they come together. This is what's commonly known as a continuous flow pan. So it's got 3 separate chambers that are connected by a cutout in the baffles. So you can see there's the main box, and then there's 2 baffles in between, and each one has a hole at one end or the other. So the way it works, this is the pre-warmer pan. So I put the cold sap in here. If I'm going to add more sap, which I've got it all in now, but if I was going to add more sap, let's say I was doing a bigger batch, I would put it into the pre-warmer pan first so that it can get up to temperature. That way when I put it into the evaporating pan, it's already warm and it doesn't stop the boil. You don't want to have a lot of sap in your pan. I've only got maybe an inch or so, inch and a half of liquid in the pan. That way I've got maximum surface area but minimum depth, so it's going to get really hot, it's going to boil really fast, and that'll help reduce that water as quick as possible. And I'll add a little bit of hot sap from the pan as we go. So now let's give time for this fire to get going, and we'll come back when it's really roaring.
Near a quiet country village through a maple on the hill. Long I every my Ricanina long ago. When the stars were shining brightly, we could hear the whippoorwill when we sat beneath the maple on the hill. Don't forget me, little darling, when they've laid me down to die. Just one little wee darling that I crave. As you linger there in sadness, you are thinking of the past. Let your teardrop kiss the flowers on my grave. We would sing love songs together when the birds had gone to rest. We would listen to the murmur of the rill. When you love me, little darling, as you did those starry nights when we sat beneath the maple on the hill. Don't forget me, little darling, when they've laid me down to die. Just one little wee darling that I crave.
I want to take a minute to explain a little bit about how this is set up. Now right now I'm getting a lot of smoke in here, and that's typical when I first start the boil. Once the fire gets going and the flue gets good and hot, it'll pull all that up and it's not too bad in here. But because of the initial smoke startup, and because we often have situations like this where it's warm, but I still need to boil down sap, and I'm going to be standing next to a hot fire, I actually built the sugar house with the back wall being almost all shutters. And that way I can open it up and open the front doors and get a cross breeze coming through. It helps clear the smoke. It also takes the heat away. So in these situations where I'm boiling in 60-degree weather, this is necessary. So if it was cold out, I certainly would have this closed up more, and once this gets going, I'd have plenty of heat in here. But as it is, this is what we gotta do. So any of you who may have made maple syrup or currently make maple syrup in a modern setting, there's going to be a few things about this that you're going to question, and I'm going to address those things. So I am using a copper pan. Yes, it is possible for maple sap to leach copper out, but not in the amount of time that it's going to be in here. The whole point with maple syrup is to put the sap in, boil it as fast as possible, get it out of the pan as fast as possible. Now if I left this in here for a week, yeah, then it would leach enough copper to be, it would taste bad. Copper is an emetic, so it could actually make you throw up. And then of course you're going to get copper poisoning. So we don't want that. But this is not going to be in here long enough to leach enough copper to do that. What little it's going to pull out is absolutely nothing in the amount of time that it's going to be there. Also, I don't have a door on the front of my firebox here. I know a lot of guys like to have a door on there because it holds the heat in. It does make it a little more efficient. For me, because this is low to the ground and because I'm putting so much in there all the time, and I wanted to also keep it as historically accurate as I could, I opted to leave this open. Yes, I know that I would get a more efficient burn if I had a door. But I have an unlimited supply of fuel, and the cedar that I'm using, it burns very hot and it burns fast and it doesn't leave a lot of coals. So that's really ideal for making maple syrup, in that you don't want a big coal bed that's going to hold heat for a long time. You want to be able to adjust that heat as you need it, and so you want it to burn hot and fast, but you don't really want a bunch of big heavy coals like you would with oak. Oak would burn too slow. So the cedar is free. I get it from the sawmill down the road. It's their scrap, and it works out really well. I've been very happy with it. Now we're boiling good. This is what we want to see. So we've got a good rolling boil going on in the pan. We've got a lot of heat down here. There's no smoke in the building at all. It's all going up the smokestack. This is perfect. This is what we want. So right now I would estimate, hopefully, we're hitting about 8 to 10 gallons per hour on this. So maybe it won't be a real late boil after all. Because we don't have a lot. We've got what's in the pan, that's it. So hopefully we won't be here all night. So I'm about ready to let a little bit of the warm sap into the pan, but I'm going to stir this fire up before I do. I'm going to put some more wood on it. I generally feed at a rate of about 2 armloads, like I just put in, every 8 to 10 minutes in order to keep the heat where I want it to be. So that's what it takes to keep what's boiling now, to keep it boiling. There's probably about 15 gallons in the pan itself, maybe a little less, maybe 12. And then there's almost 20 gallons in the pre-warmer pan as well. So that's, it takes a lot of energy to have 15 gallons boiling all at once. So now we're going to let a little bit out of the pre-warmer. So it just comes out as a trickle. I don't have a lot of pressure coming through there. And if I'm lucky, it's going to let it out of the pan or out of the pre-warmer at about the same rate that it's evaporating out of the pan. I don't think we've quite got that right now because what I'm seeing of the steam rolling off is not quite going at full speed just yet. So I'll probably end up having to shut this off about halfway through before we get the pre-warmer emptied. But we're getting water out of it. We're making syrup. Something else I failed to mention about this pan is why it's called a continuous flow pan. The idea is that you put the fresh sap in one end and it works its way through the baffles, and gravity and the weight of the sugars as it's reduced, as the water's reduced, draws it down to this side. So there is more sugar content in this section between the baffles than there is in this section, and there's more in this section than in that section. The warm sap goes in on this end, snakes through, and comes down here. Now if I was doing a really big batch and I had a whole bunch of sap, I could be putting fresh sap in that pre-warmer pan constantly as fast as it's coming out, just to get it up to temperature so I'm not putting cold sap in to stop the boil. That warm sap could be running in to this end and pushing the sugar down, and by the time it gets to here, it's almost syrup. It's not quite, but it's almost syrup. And then I've got a tap here on the end that I can open up and I can draw off as that gets thick, before it gets too thick. I can draw that off a little bit at a time and then put that in a bucket and finish it over a fire or on a stove. So that's why it's called a continuous flow pan. Really, I built this with the idea of doing a lot more than I am doing. Right now I just don't have the time and energy to keep up with a whole bunch of taps. So I've got about 20 taps out, and that's all I can handle right now, and it produces small boils. My biggest boil last year I think was about 150 gallons at one time. So that doesn't really lend itself well to the point of a continuous flow pan. Now if I was doing 500 gallons at a time or 1,000 gallons at a time, boy, this would be great. But I don't have the time or energy for that right now. The cat really loves maple syrup season. As soon as I come out here, he knows what the buckets look like, he knows what the taps look like, and as soon as I come out here, he is glued to me from that point on, at least until I start the fire. And then, as long as I walk away from the fire, he'll stay here. He loves sitting close to the fire. This is Spencer. He's a pretty good kid. He's a little old, but he's got a good spirit, good nature about him. He's a friendly cat.
Yes, beneath that dear old maple that still stands upon the hill, there we listen to the murmurs of the rill. There we pledge to love forever while the birds sing melody as we sat beneath the maple on the hill. How I love you, dearest darling, our love will never die. Through the years it has withstood the storms of life. As it guided us through safely, it will guide us further still. It will guide us to that happy home on high. I will not forget you, darling, when the angels call you home. And this prayer I'll whisper softly o'er the rill. Oh, dear God, in all thy mercy, do not part us at the last. Let us sleep beneath the maple on the hill. Now the shadow waitens, darling, let me kiss your icy brow. Soon the angels will be calling to for me. Then we'll meet again, dear darling, as you lie so cold and still neath the shade of that old maple on the hill.
So we're making a lot of progress here. We're actually evaporating about as fast as the sap is going into the pan, so that's really good. I'll probably, here in a little while, have to take that pre-warmer pan off because once it runs down to the bottom. I don't want to leave it on there and risk scorching anything. So I'll take that off here in a minute. Now those of you who are more experienced in maple syrup, you may notice that I'm not using a hydrometer or measuring for Brix or anything like that. And the reason is partly because I wanted to keep this historical. You know, 100 years ago or 200 years ago or any of the historical periods that I try to do these sorts of things, they didn't have those tools. Those are more recent things. So they did it by feel, and if they could do it by feel, I can do it by feel too. Also, initially when I first started doing this, I couldn't afford that equipment. And so I just sort of figured it out. I made some mistakes along the way. To be honest, I do several batches every year, and I've been doing it for about 8-9 years now. And I've had one batch that went bad, got mold in it, because I hadn't taken enough water out. And I had one batch that got crystals in it because I took too much water out. So over all those years, that's not a bad track record, really. I've been pretty pleased with how it's gone out. And there's ways you do it. For me, partially, I just I boil it down in the pan until I'm not comfortable boiling it any further. Basically, when I see so little liquid in the pan that I'm afraid that I might, you know, scorch it or something like that, I go ahead and pull it off, and then I'll put it in a smaller pot over a smaller fire and go ahead and finish it down into syrup with that. Alright, so we're actually making really good progress. The number one rule of making maple syrup is you never ever walk away from the pan. And I ran back to the house to get another battery for the camera and thought I was okay, but by the time I got back, we were dangerously low. The pan was evaporating much faster than it was coming out of the pre-warmer. So I ended up dumping the rest of the pre-warmer pan into this side of the pan to get the level back up. Hopefully, I don't think anything got scorched. I think we're okay, but it was much lower than I wanted it to be. Okay, so we're down to the crucial moments right now. I've let this cook down pretty far in the pan, and it's so low that I can't use my tap to draw off of the end like I would if I was using it as a continuous pan. So what I've got to do is I've got to get the whole pan off the fire as quickly as possible and get it dumped out so that it doesn't scorch. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to dump into my pre-warmer pan because it's handy. It's big enough to catch what's coming off the end of that pan. And I'll let that cool for a minute, and then I'll maneuver from the smaller pan into the bucket. It's just the best way I've figured out to do it when I'm doing small batches like this. If I was doing a big batch, I'd still have to do this at the end, but it wouldn't be as big of a deal. And if I had help, it would really be great, but it's just me by myself. So I'm gonna do this. It may look a little unorthodox, but it works out pretty well. And hopefully it all goes great. All right, we did it. Now, based on what I see here, we've got about 5 gallons left out of the 30 some odd gallons that we started with. takes about 40 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of syrup. So this is not even going to be a gallon of syrup. Still got a ways to go, but that's as far as I feel comfortable doing in the pan over the big fire this late at night. You know, it's dark, I can't see what's going on too well. Don't want to take any risks. Really would hate to scorch this and lose all the work that's gone into it so far. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give this a little bit to kind of cool off some. Just makes it easier to handle. And then I'll transfer it to the bucket, and then I can begin cooking that down over a smaller fire. In all likelihood, what I'll do is I'll save that for tomorrow, because I just don't want to do any more tonight. So do it in the daylight, works out a lot better. Alright, welcome back. It's been a couple of days now, and we've collected some sap and we've cooked it down in the big evaporator, and we're down to the final stages where you reduce the concentrated sap into actual maple syrup. And so we're going to do that in a smaller vessel. Makes it a lot easier to control, and we can watch our heat better. So it's a real touchy situation where you got to make sure that you're getting it right. It can really go bad real quick at this stage. So you got to watch your temperatures, and you got to watch what's happening with your syrup. So with all of this, it's nice to have companionship. It's good to have somebody there to talk to. You saw me in the sugar house with the evaporator, and it was a long, lonely time. And so for this reason, people would often have sugaring camps or sugar-offs, where everyone would get together and they would all work together in the sugar bush, and over the course of several days they would cook down the syrup, and then everybody would split it up and take it their separate ways. So we like to represent that by having a maple sugar camp in the middle of the sugaring season. And so I've enlisted some help, and we're going to have a friend of mine who is from about 3,000 miles away. We're going to drop him in here so that we've got some help for the final stage. So let's get him over here. So this is Marcus Kane, and he's been a long-time friend of mine, and we're going to get him to help us make some maple syrup. So without any further ado, let's make some maple syrup.
Sounds good.
So one of my favorite things about maple sugaring season is making old world style soft pretzels and dipping them in the hot, almost maple syrup. That is pure heaven. Don't burn your mouth.
Yeah, no promises.
That's all right.
Yeah.
So what we have here now is pretty much maple syrup. What we're going to do, we're not going to use modern tools that you would normally use, like a hydrometer, to check for the bricks of the syrup, or how much sugar content it has. We're going to use an old-fashioned method before such tools existed. This is known as the spoon test or the plate test. What you do is you take a cold metal spoon or plate and put it in the ice house or whatever, try to get it cool as you can. And usually in maple syrup season that's not a problem. It's about 70 degrees right now, which is unusual for this time of year, so our sap's not flowing very well. This is about all we're going to get. And I couldn't get my plate as cold as I normally would, just setting it outside. But you pour a little bit of that hot syrup on the plate, and you let it cool for a little while, and then you hold it and you let that syrup run down. It's not quite cool yet, but you watch for how it flows. Basically, if it flows like syrup, it's syrup. If it flows much slower than this, it's too strong. There's not enough water in it, and it's going to crystallize. And so you need to put a little more sap back in it, or a little bit of water is fine too, to bring it back up so it doesn't crystallize when you're storing it. But this looks pretty good. This is what we want to see. We want it to run about like that, and that's going to be a good, tasty maple syrup. So this batch is done. I hope you guys have thoroughly enjoyed this. We sure have. We've had a great time, and I hope that if you like this video, you will like it on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel, 20th Century Adventures, and if you would, please share the video to other people, because we'd like to get the word out. Thanks for visiting. Maple sugar! How come you taste so good? Then we go in the outtakes. Yep. Alright.
I am Maple Man, scorching the bottom of an expensive pan.
'Twas on a moonlit night, the stars were shining bright. They whispered on high, your love said goodbye. Blue moon of Kentucky, keep on shining. Shine on the one that's gonna let me blue. Well done, well done. Oh, we're rolling. We're boiling sap.